that you turn to, someone you can rely on, closer each day, home and away.
Welcome to Home and Away, a Tottenham Hotspur podcast hosted by myself, Graham Spice, and Glenn Cowie, where we discuss all things Tottenham Hotspur with both a match attending and international supporters view. How you doing, Glenn?
Yeah, good. I'm really good. Sunday evening here, had a pretty good weekend. I'm particularly looking forward to this episode because we're an interesting topic. We're welcoming back David Chen from Hong Kong.
Welcome, David.
Yeah, very good, David. Yeah. How are you, mate? Yeah, I'm all right. Still in the afternoon in Hong Kong. Couldn't be better. Just finished watching the Shanghai Formula One. It looked pretty nice in Shanghai during the race as well. Yeah. Looks like the Northern Hemisphere is creeping their way into spring, and
we've had over a week of relative dry, sunny weather. It's been quite not. Yeah.
Well, what we're all also want to take, there's another thing that's coming in. It's close to it. Is another Tottenham win in the league, but we've got to talk about it. The Fulham match, and then as I said, we finish up that, and I'm going to actually lead you to it to discuss. I'll let you introduce in a moment, Dan, on what that discussion was going to be. But yeah, the Fulham game. Graham, your viewing experience first. Did you watch live?
I did watch it live, and unfortunately, I don't know. I don't know where to start. I think he made a lot of changes from the Europa League game. I think seven changes, and a lot of them I didn't understand the justification for. If someone's playing well, and they're building confidence, and they're getting a run of games, why not play them in that match? Given that there wasn't another match for 18 days.
Well, and it's not just there wasn't a match for 18 days. Some of the players that didn't find their ways in the team actually didn't have full international duty ahead of them.
No.
Right?
They're at the training ground at the moment, kicking a ball around with the bat.
Correct.
So, really, like the players that got brought in, I thought had bad games.
Agree.
Like Bissouma was, I don't know what it is about him, but he already looks like he's in the transfer market, looking for a way out. He doesn't look like he wants to be here anymore. I don't see anything in the way he plays that shows any enthusiasm. Really disappointed with him again.
Yeah.
And again, Bergvall lost his place in the team for that. And actually, we look much better once Bergvall came on, unsurprisingly.
With a far more balance with his inside. And once again, with VDV, he's back, he's not, he's back, he's not. It's just really, really strange decisions. And then we had a couple of chances, didn't we? We had the tail chance that became a chance for Solanke as well. We kind of bobbled around the box and Solanke put it wide, but we didn't create a great deal. And then the two goals that we conceded, like you said in your notes, Sessegnon, of course he's from school, but really poor goal to concede. And then Muniz, again, it was just, we were all at sea. David, did you watch it live, mate? I can't remember what time of day it would have been. I think it was like middle of the night for me. So what was it for you? Late Sunday night?
Yeah, it's like something like 10 p.m. something. So thankfully, there's nothing much left of the weekend for the match results to ruin. Yeah, my sort of take on the situation is basically we've got to accept that at this point, the league is basically dead rubber for us. No one's paying any attention. I don't think the players are bothered as well. So it's literally just dead rubber. So, of course, the result's hugely frustrating. And it's another 2 hours of my life that I'm not going to get back. And afterwards, I feel absolutely devastated and angry about the situation. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of our season anymore. So I don't know how I feel about the situation or whether I should actually feel anything at this moment.
I think you make a good point, David, but what's frustrating, the most frustrating thing for me is I think every single match before an international break in the last 12 months, we've lost the match, and I've had 2 weeks to stew on it, which is the absolute worst.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And something else to call out, I don't know if you two have seen this or picked up on this, it's going around on a bit of social media. I only saw it today, but again, Ange Postecoglou in a bit of an altercation with a fan. I don't know if you've seen this.
Yeah, but I don't understand how that's possible because Fulham tunnel is in the corner of the pitch, right? And it's in the home end. So how did a Tottenham fan accost him from the home end?
Really strange, but more strange that Ange again seems to want to engage in these arguments and these conversations. And it's just like, mate, like, we didn't play well. Like, it's not very the fit skier, is it? You know?
Well, let's be honest, Glenn. For all the things that Ange Postecoglou is, ultimately he's an Australian.
Yeah.
So he's never going to back down from a fight, is he?
Yeah, that's very true. It's very fair. It's very fair. I can tell you that's a very true statement. But yeah, overall, pretty disappointing. But you said it, Graham, as well before when we previewed that game, in that what you want to see is a performance which is owing to the fact that he's got a full squad available. And we keep being told, once he gets players back, we're going to be so much better. And we're just not seeing it at all, which is a concern. David, I don't know what your view on that is, but Graham had a view on like I have over the weeks. He keeps saying this, you've got no excuses now. And there we go, we're served up with that. So, yeah, frustrating. Very good.
It's, I mean, what we now, nine more matches? Is it 9 or 10? I think it's 9 league matches.
Yeah, not many.
So I think 4 of them away, 5 at home, or yeah, it might be the other way around. I'm not 100% sure. Might be 5 at home, actually, thinking about it. Some tough games in that. And as you said, David, they're basically all dead rubbers at this point. I mean, there's no way the teams in the bottom 3 are catching us. So I'd say we're pretty safe on that front. But what I'm missing is, and this is what I said in the last one, was, you know, what we really need to see. I don't really care about the results, but all I want to see is the football that we saw in the first 10 matches when Ange was here. Like, I want to see the philosophies there, and that the people are still bought into that, and that we're going to try and outscore every team that we play. And at the moment, I don't feel like we're miles away from that even, and I don't feel like we're making any progress. And I don't know if the fact that the league season's already over is impacting that. But if that's the case, that's his job, is to ensure that those players are up for every match, right? And if he can't do that at this stage of the season, I mean, ultimately they should, if they all want to be involved in a European trophy this season, number one, they need to turn up for those matches as well, because they're not doing that either in some cases. Like the away game against Alkmaar, we were lucky we didn't come out of that 4 or 5-0 down.
Yeah.
But if they want to play in those matches, surely they have to justify their position in the team. And if that's the case, why aren't we seeing them showing that?
And then coming back around to the selection weirdness, if the one player that did show that against Alkmaar was Odegaard, and he finds himself out of the team. It's like, what? It's like, you know, for Brendan Johnson, who I don't know what he is. Like, he scores a lot of goals. I don't really see what he seems to do is score. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but yeah, it's strange.
I think the question, if he's not scoring, what does he give you? And at the moment, it isn't anything at all.
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, look,
I think. So sorry, just I need to take this to its natural conclusion, which is that I think the problem now is, I think the second leg of the Europa League is mid-April. It's like is it the 10th and then the 17th or something like that? I can't remember exactly.
Yes, that's right. It's the morning of the 11th and the morning of the 18th. As if I looked at it earlier, actually, it's the morning of Good Friday for me, the second leg. Yeah.
Oh wow. So that being the case, if we are out after 2 legs against Frankfurt, it's already too late in the season to really make a change anyway, right? It's not worth it.
Correct.
We'll probably have like 4 or 5 games left at that point. I don't see any value in getting rid of him then anyway, if that, assuming that the league form continues the way it is and we're out of Europe. I don't think he'll get renewed in the summer. I think we'll probably start looking for another manager. Well, I hope. And I hope there's a succession plan already, because that's the other thing we're really crap at, is seeing things coming from far enough away. This is what frustrates me with this. Sorry, I'm completely off on another.
No.
Here I go again. Why do teams like Brighton and Bournemouth and Brentford always have succession plans, not just for the managers, but for the players? So they always have this conveyor belt of people lined up they have a philosophy, the way they want to play football, and the management has a structure, and they decide the kind of players they need for that, and then they bring them in. And then when one of them moves on, there's another one that comes in behind them. And we seem to really struggle with that. It feels like a really simple approach to football that works really well for them. But yeah, I feel like sometimes we try and be too clever and we end up in a mess. Like it explodes every time someone leaves. It's like a reset button and we have to start all over again. Sorry, ran over.
No, just a quick question on that, and then we'll move on to the topic that David is here to discuss. But I'll put a question to the room, I guess. If we were actually to win the Europa League and say finish 14th or 15th, and our League 4 continues, but we do similar to what we did under Potter, we lost Champions League final, and our League 4 was pretty wobbly, to say the least. Does he keep his job? Or is there a risky turn with what happened under Ramos when we won a trophy under him? And the following season, fuck me, we were not good at all, and it just continues it. Or do you think he still gets it, even if we were to manage to achieve? It's a big ask anyway. I think he's kept.
Next season, if we do win the Europa League, we'll be in the Champions League. And how do you think we're going to fare in that? It doesn't even bear thinking about, right? We'll be lucky if we make it through the qualifying matches.
Yeah. So,
which would be embarrassing, and I don't want that.
I was going to say, so you'll be made to change the partners if he was to win it. So we get Champions League, then you're still looking at a change of manager to say, clean slate, we're in the Champions League.
I'm not convinced that that Levy would make the change, but I'm not saying it's the right decision.
Sure. No, sure. Yeah.
I like the guy. I quite like it. I like his philosophy on football. But if he's incapable of instilling that into a squad of players over 2 seasons, what makes you think he's going to be able to do it in the 3rd season?
Yeah, no, completely fair. Completely fair. Because it should be improving. Right? It shouldn't be going the other way as far as consistent.
Or even staying the same. I feel like we've regressed.
Yeah. I mean, how can anyone disagree with that, even with the injuries? Right? As it's even starting to get players back, we're not seeing better football. We're not seeing consistent hands. Right? So, why is that? Well, I said, I'm going to be enjoying this podcast mainly as a bit of a listener because I've got to drop off a little bit early, but we're here as a bit of special. But Graham, maybe you want to do the intros to what that special is and a little more about David, and then we'll hand over to David.
So, thank you, Glenn. So, David is here. When we had David on as a guest previously, he mentioned that during his studies, he specifically focused on market expansion for English football, which I thought was quite an interesting topic, given the fact that Tottenham has very much obviously been pushing into the Asian market, and that we've done tours in North America, and you can see the growth of international supporters groups for the club and what that means to economics of football, not both from a TV audience, but also from merchandising and other aspects. Just felt it was a really interesting subject that probably warranted a longer discussion on its own. And given that it's an international break and we've got no league games to get depressed about, I thought we would be interesting to look at that in a bit more detail. So thanks for coming back, David. So how would you like to start this? First, how would you like to explain what it is that this market expansion is and what it means for football?
Right, perhaps let's start with a little bit of my background. So basically, all of the works and the different sorts of trends that I'm observing was part of my Cambridge MPhil thesis. So that's what it is. I have a background in sociology, so I mainly focus on the implications of these social processes, of these market expansion processes. So perhaps we should start with why the Premier League clubs are doing these overseas expansion as a bit of background information.
Sure.
Right. So the way I see it, there are multiple motives to why EPL clubs nowadays are doing this overseas expansion. So I like to start with the fundamental reason. The fundamental reason being that nowadays Premier League clubs are not just sporting institutions, they're also financial institutions. So there's a dual nature of clubs here. So you see here nowadays, US capital buying into the Premier League clubs, other capitals as well. Of course, we've got Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but also with the example of Man United, you also see how British capital could also play a role in this. So what this means is that these people are not here because of the goodness of their heart. I mean, some of them might have motives in terms of them being supporters, but they're also very much here to turn a profit. And if they're there to turn a profit, then the obligations of shareholding and the structure of the board then need to ensure that they have ever increasing revenue. Because how they turn a profit is basically two ways. First way is through shareholder dividends. And the second way is through exiting. So how do you exit from a football club? Other people buy you out, or your club is floated on the stock exchange on an initial public offering, and then you got bought out by the retail investors. So in either of those situations, it's very important for these owners or partial shareholders to increase the valuation figure. So how much the club is worth. And how that is calculated has a lot to do with how much revenue it could generate. And how much revenue it could sustainably generate, not just on a one-time figure. So we're not talking about one-time player sale of like 100 million as a sort of benchmark. We're all talking
cup runs.
Yeah, exactly. Unless the cup run is persistent. But that is probably part of my next point. So the first point here is that nowadays profit generation is an inherent instinct of the Premier League clubs, simply because they've got a mandate from the logic of capital, basically. Their shareholders, well, ensure that they have to go and look for more profit. And the second thing, as you've mentioned, is that there's now much more of an association between how much revenue and profit you can generate and the sporting success, because that translates into the transfer coffer. So this has always been sort of the case since the league is a thing, like the professional league. But more so in the 21st century, you see the monumental impact that teams like Man City and Chelsea get once they have a bit more money to play around, once they got taken over by ownership who like to spend a lot more money. And more recently with Newcastle as well. And so we see a consolidation from the big three or the big four to now the big six. And this is, if you look at the revenue of the big six, that's basically somewhat correlating with sporting successes. Spurs and Man United in this season notwithstanding, of course.
Yeah.
But you see how that's sort of like a correlation. So if you want more sporting successes, then you've got to generate more revenue. And what we're seeing right now is because the home market of the UK is just, well, no offense to all the UK listeners, but the home market is really dwarfed in terms of size by the international market. And obviously there's a lot more spaces of growth in the international market as well. And the third, maybe last point that I want to mention about the Premier League club's motives in terms of market expansion is the regulatory pressure. Because the first 2 points are about the sort of intrinsic value of generating more money. But now there's also the regulation pressure to generate money. For instance, we see clubs falling foul of the PSR requirements. And before that, we see clubs falling foul of UEFA requirements for financial fair play as well. So actually, there is now a mandated regulation system that claims that a club needs to be sustainable. And by sustainable, they mainly mean sustainable financially. So if you want to keep spending, then you've got to find new revenue sources. So these are the major ways how market expansion is now basically being made a necessity in the modern age, and why we see Premier League clubs doing these markets in Korea, in Japan, in Southeast Asia, in China, and also elsewhere in the Americas, in Africa.
It's the regulatory pressure is interesting as well, though, because one of the things that is clear is that the clubs with the most money, the ones who are backed by nation states and huge investment vehicles, had more money and more legal clout than the league does. And so that is a bit of a regulatory arms race to see what ways they can find to circumvent the rules. Seems to be almost as much invested in that as in actually generating the additional revenue. Some of those clubs, the biggest ones, the ones with those kind of like sugar daddies, shall we say, they don't really need to generate more revenue because they have more money than they need already. But their ability to be able to spend it is the challenge for them, I guess, which is an interesting change in the dynamic in the leagues, because it used to just be the one who had the most money spend it and was successful. Now, you mentioned Newcastle, for instance, they've been held back by their ability to spend based on the revenue, based on the regulatory pressure, right? So I guess is that the league trying in some small way to try and level the playing field a bit, but actually it's not helped so far in the history of the Premier League since '92 anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the regulation, you're absolutely right that the original intention of these regulations is that you want to sort of level the playing field, but it's not very effective because of two reasons. The first reason is that it's regressive in a way, because basically in a meritocratic competition, what are you to say that having more money is now actually a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And secondly, it's also reactive. So you first got Chelsea and Man City, and then you got the first wave of regulation. And now we see in the boardrooms of the Premier League, they're trying to figure out whether the football group model has more implications to this. So if people do things, the clubs do things and reap its reward first, and then they got regulated later. So that's why it's not very effective right now. And it's also a very interesting question, probably for a future research project, to see how this sort of regulation could actually, preemptively predict these trends and try to come up with a regulatory framework against that rather than being reactive. But that it always comes down to this. So you have the intentional effects of a regulation, and then you have the unintentional effects of a regulation. And in our case, the unintentional effect is basically pushes all the Premier League clubs, if they want to compete in the league, that they have to always find new revenue sources, even though you're flush with cash from your owner, right? So Man City and Newcastle also need to do it now.
Yeah. It's really interesting. For instance, just as an example, like what Chelsea have done in recent years by putting players on very, very long contracts and then amortizing the value of the player over the duration of that contract as a way of basically, again, circumventing the rules. So again, as you said, it's reactive. So now probably that will be something they'll try and close a loop on, I would suggest, in a subsequent round of regulation. But you're right. It's always after the Lord Mayor's show. Like it's already happened. So someone's already found the hole, used it, and it's too late.
Yeah, I mean that's also a testament of UK regulation in general. But I think I'd rather not go to that topic at the current moment.
No, that feels like an entire podcast in itself, let alone an episode.
Yeah, the politics. But for the sake of retaining our viewers and listeners, perhaps we should swiftly pivot.
Sure, let's go.
Right. So now that I've sort of established the motives a little bit, I want to talk a little bit more about the method, because I think that everybody know about a couple of methods, because, we've all seen pre-season games in places. We've all seen catered market materials, for instance, I don't know, Chinese New Year greetings or Ramadan, to be more timely. But I want to sort of consolidate that into two major themes that I'm seeing here. So the first theme is that it's localization. So what do I mean by that? So we have to recognize the basis that modern football, English football, is predominantly a Western product. So for them to make sense to audiences who are not from a Western background, you need to package it in a way that makes sense, that is consumable to these markets. So how you do that, for instance, you might localize how you represent your club in terms of the social values. So this will be one of the most prominent examples that I would give, is that most of the Premier League clubs, they would try to find a way to not mention the Rainbow Laces campaign, the LGBTQ rights promotion campaigns in locations where that might be considered as adverse, for instance, in the Middle East. So that is a sort of localized value representation. And another thing that people really overlook is how big language access is for different markets. Because much as English is the lingua franca of the entire globe, well, one would like to think, because, well, that's one of the many languages that I speak, so that's what I would like to think anyway. But we have to acknowledge the fact that not everybody who might consume football speaks English. So therefore, nowadays on the social media, you will see how clubs have how many different language channels now on Twitter or on X. I remember last time I was checking the Spurs profile, they've got like 6 or 7 different languages that's run by the club, so that the content is more, well, approachable to the distant markets, right? And then the second way that the clubs do this is by hybridization. So what I mean by this is they take something that's local and they take something that's football related and they fuse them together. So what could that be? For instance, personalities. Now, as we're in the Spurs podcast, Son, right? So Son is someone, it's a hybridization of football consumption and South Korean personality, right? So he is clearly someone who held a lot of sway in South Korea, and he also represents the club as well, right? So that's a natural way that these sorts of personalities could be hybridized as a sort of symbol that you could pivot your understanding of football on. And they're also cultural symbols. So, well, for instance, Squid Game. We've seen Squid Game promotions in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, right? So if you never watch football in your life, you might wonder, what did the Squid Game got to do with anything, right? It's not football related.
I think most of the people in the stadium felt that as well, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, apart from the fact that it's just another spectacle that's mainly financed by sadistic billionaire owners, that's sort of only fair comparison, right? But it matters because there are certain groups of people in Korea and also elsewhere abroad that really follow Squid Game. Squid Game is something that they take pride in, right?
Yeah.
For random and various reasons. So by combining that spectacle with football, then you might attract new audiences. You might expand your market, right? Maybe you're a Squid Game fan and you were looking at the social media promotion, like, I wonder what Spurs are about. And then, of course, instant regret later. But
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Specifically because there's some really good examples around the Korean market. It's an interesting market, given where we're currently at. And Sun has been, I imagine, been a massive reason why then there's an estimated 12 million Spurs supporters in South Korea, and at every match, 1,000 Gyeongnan Sun shirts are sold every match day in the stores around the stadium. So you can see a direct financial correlation between that, even in locally. So that has a local impact as well. So match attending, amazing. Also, if you go on Spurs Play, so the Spurs streaming service, they have dual language commentary. They have English and Korean for all of the matches that they show, which again I thought was really interesting. So they clearly know their market well.
Yeah, and it's specialized as well. It's not generalized. Oh, we appeal to everyone. I mean, of course, every club like to appeal to everyone, but in practicality, you specialize in very specific markets because of the availability of resources that you have, right? So, for instance, if you have a Korean player, so like Wolves or Spurs, then you can go into the Korean market a lot more. You can connect with them a lot more than, say, Man City, right?
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, and now that we're on the topic of South Korean fans, let's move on to talk a bit more generally about what the implications of these market development strategies are for UK supporters and in the UK in general. And then I would like to really talk about South Korean supporters and some of the discourses I've seen on the internet about South Korean supporters in the stadium, if that's okay with you.
Sure, of course.
Right, so my results of this research is basically in terms of how these market expansions influence UK supporters. So the major theme is what I would place here as quote-unquote displacement. So that can mean a lot of things. So firstly, the direct impact of the international expansion of the market of these clubs is the price of tickets. So that's simply supply and demand, right? So there are only so many seats in the stadium. I mean, you can build a new one, but after you build a new one, there's only restricted, limited supply up to a certain number. So if the demands go up, then that creates a lot of impetus for the ticket price to be hyped. So we see that nowadays with Spurs, firstly with with the season ticket prices, and secondly with senior concessions as well, because obviously, I mean, if there is more demand, they can say that because of the demand, we are a market organization, we sell football tickets as our product. Then you can say that, well, then we should raise prices, right? Because that this simple market economics, price stabilize roughly, price is a stabilizer between supply and demand. So when the demand greatly exceeds the supply, then the price will rise. And that influences a lot of people, especially UK supporters in this case, because you are in a situation where tourists and also other supporters from overseas, they're there only for the occasion. They're not here for the long term, most of the situations, right? So they're willing to pay a lot higher prices and spend a lot more at the stadium than local UK supporters who might be there every week or at least every month. So that is the first major trend that I'm observing now. The second major trend that I'm observing now is the changes in the stadium environment. So in terms of Spurs, if you've been to the Spurs shop, you'll see Korean signages. And within the stadium space, you see flags from various supporter groups, right? You see Dutch flags, you see Korean flags, you see a lot of different flags. So that's physical changes in the stadium environment. They've got different reasons that they want to be there, and they all got their different modes of behavior that might be distinct from what the UK supporters are used to. And the third thing, in terms of displacement, is the loss of control. So by this, I mean that these football clubs are also local community institutions and cultural institutions, not just sporting ones. So by this, I mean two things. First thing is the loss of control of market priority. Because the more revenue you generate from overseas market, the less the demands and hopes and priorities of UK supporters matter, right?
That's true. I can see.
That's first bit of displacement, and the second bit is metaphorical. So by this, I really mean that. So you talk about fan ownership. That ownership doesn't translate to shares. That ownership translates to a cultural affinity and a sense of say in what the club represents, right? For instance, inclusivity or a certain identity in a certain region. But if your majority supporters are international, do you still then, as a local supporter, have that say in what your club is supposed to represent? If 50% of your supporters are, say, from the Middle East, can you really say that our club represents a champion for, say, LGBTQ rights? So there's some displacement in terms
There's dilution as well, right? Because I guess that to accommodate everyone, you have to compromise a lot on everything. So it becomes a kind of, what's the lowest common denominator for something that everybody can get around, but without really, and probably losing some identity in the process, for sure.
Yeah, and there is no common denominator. So what I've observed is we really shouldn't think about this sort of market expansion as a one-way process to individual markets without links between those individual markets, right? So, for instance, we have European supporters. We also have Middle Eastern supporters. European supporters will also notice that in our Middle Eastern communications, we don't mention LGBTQ rights as much as a club. Yeah. So that also creates a new level of contention.
Yeah.
Because some supporters in some distinct markets, some distant markets don't like what is happening in other distant markets, right? So there's a very complicated dynamic.
I guess that's the thing, is that you can't get the benefits of expansion without it. It's a two-way thing. Absolutely. You're right. So if it's all of a sudden, if 80% of our revenue comes from international markets, and if you look at the TV rights deals, even, for instance, the international one is huge, then you have to accept that you have to accommodate all of those markets, not just the local one, which is to the detriment to the. I think if you look at all of this, the ones who fare the worst out of all this are the local supporters who attend matches. I think there's the TV market's really unaffected by this, right? The TV watching market, but the people who are match attending. I can give you an example. I went to the AZ Alkmaar game at the stadium, and this isn't specifically an international supporters thing, but you talk about the displacement. People complain about the makeup of the stadium crowd, how that it's there's no noise, there's no atmosphere, etc. But I sat in my usual season ticket seat, and there wasn't a single person in my block who was the regular season ticket holder. So people are selling their tickets on. How can you blame someone for buying that ticket if the same people who are complaining are selling those tickets on anyway? So there's the modernization of ticketing in stadiums, like with the exchange, means that historically people who had season tickets might have just not been able to go to matches, and that would have been the end of it. But now they can sell those tickets on very easily, and there's always a market for it. So, and I imagine a lot of those international supporters groups are picking up tickets on the exchange, like everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, they're picking up tickets on the exchange as club intended, right? So they would rather have bums on seats than empty seats, because it's not just bums on seats. I mean, they're taking your ticket money anyway, so that bit you can't take it back. But it's also about spending in and around the stadium, right? In the club shop, the pints, the food.
They're better to have somebody there who's spending than not have somebody there who's paid already. There's also, I don't know if you've seen, but with the announcement on the season ticket renewals, there's everyone's looking at the headline value, which is season tickets remain the same price.
Yeah.
But the changes underneath that are quite different. Number one, what used to happen is that when you sold your ticket on an exchange, you would get the general admission price for the ticket. So for a Category A game, for my ticket would be £81.
Yeah.
But now what they would do is they will give you 1/19 of the season ticket value, because 19 matches, they give you 1/19, which will be £52.
Yeah.
And they will then sell that ticket as a Category A ticket on the exchange, but you'll only get £52. They'll get £81.
Yeah, so like they're always trying to find ways to generate more
exactly. And also on top of that is, now it used to be able to transfer your ticket to a friend. Anybody who's got a CRN, like a reference number.
If you've got a ticket account, then you can do it. If you're a season ticket holder, you can just transfer the ticket.
Yeah. So that was quite handy. Not anymore. That's changing as well. So now, from now on, the person receiving it will have to be at least a member, or at least have been a paid member. So again, the headline number, season ticket price is frozen, but they've managed to generate more revenue out the same number of people.
Well, I mean, that's just a general trend of things. It's not just a Spurs exclusive thing. You're seeing across the country.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah, and the last bit that I really want to tackle is basically, I've seen a lot of discourses surrounding, as you've mentioned a little bit, on foreign supporters in the stadium and what that means to the stadium atmosphere. So I'll also like to go a little bit into that, if that's okay with you. Right, so I've seen a lot of discourses about how the stadium atmosphere is now flat, like there's not enough people who care enough there. There are a lot of tourists there. These sort of discourses. And I understand the frustration, and some of it does reflect a real issue, but I like to be a bit of a contrarian here and push back on some of the narratives a little bit. So the first thing that people really say is that, oh, they're just here for, I don't know, they're just here for fun, or they're just here for an experience, right? They don't really care about the club. So I like to push back against that narrative in the sense of a question to everyone, basically. What makes you a Spurs supporter? Perhaps you can have a go at answering that question. Everybody's will have a different answer.
Yeah.
What's yours, mate?
Mine, well, it's a family thing. It's how it started. And I think that's quite interesting because we had that conversation when we had you on the first time. And I weirdly had the same conversation with people all over the world. And a lot of it was the thing that me and my dad did, or, you know, it was how it was a bonding thing, and we had this shared. I think that all in all, it's kind of a belonging thing, right? For me, it's been feeling that I belong to something, and that it's something that maybe shared the way that I like football to be played. It's a very difficult question to answer, because if you think about the amount of pain that we've gone through in my lifetime, in terms of how poor we've been for a majority of that period, you'd have to question my sanity at points.
Of course, mate. But, you know, my point being that there are multiple ways that you can watch football.
Yes.
You can say that it's something that runs in the family, it's some bonding thing. But you can't say that if someone's from the area and that's just the institution in the area, that his reason of supporting the club is less legitimate, right? You can't say to someone, that if someone just likes the playing style, he still pays the same money. He's still there, right? So you can't say that reason is less legitimate. So what are we to say that if someone is there for a good time, if someone is there to support their national icon, if someone is there because it relates to their identity and their meaning of life in any certain way, that our reasons of consuming football is better than theirs? What do we have the moral authority to say that? I think, for me personally, the answer is no.
I 100% agree. I've no issue with it. I've had some of my best evenings at the ground have been surrounded by Korean supporters. Like, I've been in a block where I was the only non-Korean supporter, and let me tell you, they were just as excited about the match as I was. And so it was a really fun evening. And I think that it's interesting, right? I think there's a degree of xenophobia. It's certainly, I think, in some of the local support, but I think they feel like it's our thing and that we don't want to share it with anyone. But that's not the world we live in. But it's absolutely not the world we live in. And I see the benefits of that expansion, the market expansion. You can see that the club's revenues are huge. Now, you know, we're in the top 10 in the world for sporting revenue. But that comes with, it's a two-way door. I think, as you said, is that it's never a one-way thing. We're not just going to other countries and siphoning money back to the club. If you really want the engagement and the continued engagement, then you need to create something that's going to have them buy into it in the same way that the local supporters do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will also push back on some of the stuff that you said a little bit, because I mean, I'm an academic, and the job of an academic is to be a contrarian in most of the situations. Sure. So let me just do that. So in terms of some of the local supporters' feelings, I wouldn't go as far as sort of like a xenophobic instinct, because firstly, the frustrations are really real. Like, they are really being displaced. It's maybe a thing that's been running in the family for 3 generations. It may be a ritual that is nowadays no longer affordable. It might not feel the same as the old times. You know?
I mean, I am one of those people, right? So I guess my view is legitimate as well from that perspective, right? So, yeah, exactly. And I agree. There are changes, but I think my honest answer is, I think those changes would have happened irrespective of international support or not, because it's where your opening section on the duality of clubs, yes, is actually the reason, not not the international support. It is about the fact that it's become a money-making machine, and that historically owners and chairmen were people from the local area.
Yeah.
Well, if you go back far enough, most football clubs were founded by industrialists who wanted something to keep their employees out of trouble at the weekend.
Yeah.
So they created sporting clubs for them to go and play, and it was something and that's how they grew. That's how most big sporting institutions in the UK came about. So the world's changed significantly, and I stand by it. I've seen a lot of sort of xenophobic stuff online, but I think that maybe something else that's really interesting is that I think that the social media gives everyone a platform, right? And it means even very minority views can become very vocal. People can be very vocal and can be heard by a big audience, and I think that doesn't help.
Yeah,
So,
and on the other hand, much as some of the stuff that people are saying are really offensive and inappropriate, they do have a certain point. It comes from a point of frustration, and B is another thing that from my observation at least, I don't know about you, but from my observation at least, holds some truth, is that international supporters also need to do the job in the stadium, right? Because, because it's football. It's a spectator sport because the spectator plays a role in the team's fortune. So having one bloke roaring you on and shouting random abuses at you is different from having 60,000 people doing the same, right?
That's fair. The thing about that's one of the reasons English football is the spectacle that it is around the world, right? It's because the teams are so well supported in the stadium. And it comes across in and we don't want to lose that. I don't think we want to lose that. So maybe we should be more encouraging of those international supporters fans to get involved in the singing and the abuse.
Yeah, exactly. So this is my point, right? So the local supporters, from their perspective, they're opening their world to the international supporters, be it willingly or unwillingly. So they're here for good, right? They're not going to go away anytime soon. So instead of feeling bitter about the changes, how about you go that I've been here for 60 years, I've been here for 40 years, I know how this works. Let us also open our world to you so that you're no longer a spectator, you're no longer a visitor, you could be a part of us, and we'll teach you how it's done in our world, how it means in our world, what the club means here, how we're supposed to behave here, and see what they take it. And I say, not with 100% certainty, there will be frictions, but I will say the vast majority of foreign supporters, and also more sort of rich supporters from the UK, which I haven't touched about at all here, but that's also a phenomenon that's been going on, the displacement of working class fans. Yeah. So I think the vast majority of them would be receptive to understanding what this means and how other people are consuming this sport, are watching this sport, what this means to them, how you support the club. So I think most people will be open to it if a certain sense of arrogance and, frankly, prejudice could be dropped from a certain section of our supporters and English supporters in general.
I think it's a fair comment. I think there's opportunity there for things to be better, for sure. Yeah, and I'd be up for it. I mean, do you think then there's an opportunity for the official supporters clubs, the international ones, to really help with that? Because I think it's one of those things, right, where if you're in the stadium sat in the seat, it's probably already too late, right? So these are things that we need to start working on before people arrive, so they already know before they come. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the supporters club, the club is really trying. I mean, much as I thought the ownership and, like all the stuff related to how they're generating more profits and milking every penny out of the fans, they are really trying, for the right or wrong reason, to engage more with international supporters to see what it means to them, right? That's part of the strategy of their business development, but that also has the effect of, communicating what football is like in the UK to these supporters. And don't get me wrong, the vast majority of supporters, international supporters, are actually diehard Spurs fans, because simply for the merit of the fact that they are there and they're much further away. So it costs a lot of time and money to go to the stadium, right? So I think it's less about the fact that there's a lack of willingness. It's more the fact that there's a lack of exposure that happens on the ground, right? So, for instance, apart from in the stadium space, local supporters don't really interact with international supporters as much.
Yeah.
Like physically, simply by the merit that they're not there, right? So yeah, it's one way that could patch this issue somehow. For instance, we've got a lot of atmosphere generating groups, right? So we've got Songshi, we've got Return of the Shelf, So all these groups have a social media presence. So if you're someone that is worried about the atmosphere and have some connections on social media with other supporters who might be in the stadium one day, but it's not now, push those profiles and accounts across, right? Let them understand what the culture is, what the different discourse is, and what the songs are, what the chants are, and why we hate Soul Campbell, right?
Yeah, I think I was going to say that maybe the club has the reason that we always talked about that English football is loved outside of the UK is because it's but then does the club have a need to in also we've already talked about how they are shaping the packaging of the games to the local markets that they're approaching, but do they need to maintain some of the integrity of the things that make a match day experience when they market it? Mostly I guess it's for the television audience in those countries.
Yes.
So there's that bit that's missing between come and see us at the stadium. This is the kind of experience you can expect, and here's what a match day experience would be like. I feel like they could help themselves as well.
Yeah. So the way I see it, the club have two conflicting impulses. So the first impulse is to maintain what it currently is. Because let's be honest, the atmosphere is a huge part of why the Premier League as a product is attractive, right? So that is an impulse of maintenance and maybe an impulse of better exposure and education in terms of foreign supporters. But on the other hand, they also have an impulse of control. And let's face it, the local supporters are the most vocal in terms of pushing back against the club.
Yeah.
Because they understand a lot more. And they have a lot more preferences because the club is a deeply rooted community institution. So if I'm someone who's corporate, who only cares about return on my investment, do I really want those people to be there to dispute my behaviors and actions?
Yeah, it's a fair point. Like the most negative ones about the club ownership are the local supporters groups, for sure.
Exactly. And why would you want to make money when you are taking flack on your image if you can make money just without any pushback, right? So there's also that impulse. So it's an interesting balance, and a balance that I don't think is recognized enough by our fan base, or by any fan base really, because basically there are different agendas that the ownership is trying to achieve at the same time, and they all act against each other somehow.
Yeah. Well, lots to think about. I appreciate the talk, David. It's been very interesting. And I hear you're over in June. Is that still happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be coming over. So basically the natural conclusion of this project is I need to basically dig a lot more on this dynamic of displacement. So I'll be coming in June to do some interviews with regular match attending Premier League supporters, capture what their experiences are like, capture what they think about it. And then I'll aim to publish that as well. So if you are listening and if you are a local match attending supporter, ideally a season ticket holder, then I'd like to talk to you.
Sure. I'd be interested in doing that. And I probably can find you give you a bit of variety.
Well, that would be really appreciated. And thanks for having me on. I mean, it's always great for someone who works in research to share what they work in research.
Yeah. and
exposure.
And I think it's an interesting topic, and I think most match-attending supporters probably wouldn't have considered it. We're simple folk. We go to football matches to watch football, but to really understand the drivers and the business behind it, I think is important, because ultimately decisions are being made that affect our club. So always a pleasure. Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, mate.
Thanks to everyone who's listened in. Please like and subscribe to the podcast to tickle the algorithm so we can get in front of more Spurs supporters. And to close us out, come on you Spurs.
You can contact us on email at tottenhamhomeandaway@gmail.com or on Twitter X @TottenhamH&A.
Let me be the one that you turn to, someone you can rely on closer each day.